Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Marbo's most self-aware work as it
Wait,
releases.
sorry, hold on. Can we do the 5 seconds again? I just realized my mic settings were off. I was in church mode, which is why I would have been so echoey.
Church mode. Okay, sure.
Yeah, wait. Do I not sound really echoey like this?
Oh, you did. I didn't notice until you said it.
Okay. I should be back to normal now.
Okay. All right, 5 seconds in, we'll go again.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Marbo's most self-aware work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to talk about Backaway 5.C, Backaway 5.5, and a great newspaper with a Sudoku in it. Let's begin by discussing Backaway 5.C, which stands for Clem, because we're back in Clem's head, which is fun. She is approached by a nice-looking family who just ask her for a simple favor.
Yeah, or not so much a fate. They make her an offer she can't refuse.
Yes, I guess. Well, they don't let her refuse.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun, isn't it? There's this family, and you kind of just, or at least I initially had the thought of like, oh, it's just some poor family who have kind of gotten, under the thrall of this earring. And then it just gets more and more horrifying until we get to the pinnacle of it. My favorite part where they will basically do anything to get this earring, but as soon as Clem says don't kill anybody anymore, they're like, oh, fine. Well, if you're just going to be unreasonable. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. There's a really fun de-evolution of things as this scene goes on, because I started and I was like, oh, interesting, this thing affects innocent people.
Yes.
And then sort of like, oh no, okay, so they seem to be others, but they're being pretty nice about this. And
Yeah.
then they just turn into like full-on murder monsters. It's yeah, it's like a very fun ride that we get sort of taken on there, as this sort of descends further and further. And yeah, as you said, like I love the bit where she's like, I just want a life, and they're like, oh, we can do that, that's easy.
Yeah.
And then
What kind of
the
life would you
yeah,
like?
it becomes clear that they're gonna kill someone. It's so good. Yeah, I tried to see if these things were like any sort of existing mythological creature
Mm.
Wabo was basing them on. I couldn't find anything. So if anybody has any ideas, hit us up. The closest I sort of came to finding anything is there's a Korean goddess called Eopsin. I'm not
Mm.
sure if I'm pronouncing that even remotely right, but it was like a black snake that was associated with like hoarding wealth and
Mm.
stuff and getting wealthy. So that seemed appropriate to these folks.
Yeah, well, it definitely had a bit of a like religious vibe to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The facts we sort of know about them are they don't like water. They carry like $60,000 in their RV. Um, they breathe a lot, and they have a connection to this black snake business.
Mm.
So, and that's I think that goddess they were like offering to let her meet was Eopson.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, they clearly have some connection to some kind of goddess thing. Yeah, so Clem rejects this family, outsmarts them, continues on her way, looking for Daniel. And she stumbles across Guillaume, slowly bleeding in his cave.
Hmm. I was worried for a sec when we saw all this blood, but then he does say he's healing, and I remember in Daniel's interlude, Daniel thought of it as a non-fatal blow. So
Mm.
I think Guillaume is just being a bit dramatic here with how much blood he's allowing himself to bleed. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to say bleeding out, but he is healing, right? He's just kind of doing it in a very dramatic way, I guess.
Yeah, like yeah, setting the scene for when Clem shows up, I suppose, because he's got this sword fucking ready to go in the middle of the room.
Mm.
As Daniel would say, he's very extra.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's funny how quickly Clem finds this cave as well. Like Bristow talked a bunch about how he was like getting the aware and like sort of muddying them up a bit, like giving some of the gilded lily powers to Sharon and Daniel and the others were getting, like, sort of this bleed through effect. Um, and you can sort of see that here. Like Clem, she keeps getting distracted. First of all, like she notes, it's like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm meant to be finding Daniel, and then she just sort of walks straight into the fairy cave. Like that feels very Daniel to me. That she was like, you know, yeah, getting distracted and then just stumbling into Fae shit.
Mm, mm, yeah. Um, yeah, you're right. It, they're really just very effective at getting exactly where they want to go.
Yeah, and
Um,
and and part of me feels like that's the Clem in them, but I find that interesting because it definitely makes them a much more effective team, and I can't help
yes.
but like tie that back to the Kenneteers a little bit. Like, is that what's happening there, or if not, why? Like, it's just
Mm,
the taking people with like these sorts of magical things that have been done to them or that have happened to them, and
mm,
softening their edges and evening them out a bit. Actually, kind of seems like it could be good if it wasn't Bristow doing it.
mm. Yeah, yeah, true. If they were self-organized, maybe.
Yeah, or if somebody
Um,
was doing it with an eye to actually making their lives better.
mm, yeah. Um, a fun note during this interaction with Guillermet is he kind of defaults back to his mysterious mentor role, which is great. He which is the same role he's obviously been playing for Lucy, kind of questioning and giving hints, but never quite explaining things, which is exactly what he does for Clem as well.
Yeah, a fairy is kind of exactly the sort of person who you want to walk someone like Clem along these lines. 'Cause
Mm,
he's so good at, even when he doesn't tell her things, he's clearly, like, implanting thought or patterns of thought in her head. Like, he's constantly sort of suggesting, things like, "Oh, people tell you things if you listen," and just, like, all this stuff like, "You should just be asking questions." Like, he doesn't tell her anything, but, like, I could get the sense that he's making things harder for people like Bristow down the line.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you can kind of see some of the pieces that he's put into place, unraveling in Clem's mind as um as she's going through the rest of this chapter.
Yeah, or
You
even the
know,
next, or is it?
yes.
Yeah, no, it's later on where somebody's like, "Oh, don't worry about what we just said about missing sarcasm," and Clem has this sort of moment where she's like, "I'm going to think about that later," and I could just
Mm.
imagine Guillermet like doing a little fist pump.
Well, there's a moment where Clem leaves the cave and she thinks, "I still have so many questions, but I don't think I'll come back to this guy," which I just thought was kind of like, "Nice work, Gilloway. You really towed that line perfectly." Um,
Yeah,
he gives Clem a mysterious package, which we'll get into later. And yeah, so basically, the gist of what he tells Clem is he talks about privilege, right? Like almost explicitly. He says, "Hey, some people are born with stuff, and some, as a kind of universal cost, whether you believe that or not, have to struggle." And Clem, with her mysterious gifts, is born to struggle, but don't give up. You'll come to understanding soon.
yeah, and like obviously you're right, that metaphor is sort of so blatant that even Clem calls it out in the text. She's like, "I don't care about politicians and celebrities and stuff," and I was like, "Whoa, hold on there, Clem.
Mm.
You can't just break the fourth wall like that." But, I yeah, I mean, I do find this speech really interesting. It's obviously going to tie into all the stuff with Daniel and Verona, and we'll talk about that when both of those 2 come up, I think. But, because yeah, I guess, yeah, I feel like this is a really important thing for someone like Clem to hear, because if she has this sort of gilded liliness or whatever, like this sort of curse that was put on her by the universe, like, even if you take down some of the bullshit like Alexander and stuff, if people like Clem are getting cursed and there's no cure, like, you can make society as egalitarian as you can, and there's still going to be people like Clem who are just going to suffer more,
Mm.
if that makes sense. So it's like, yeah, I like it's a really important if message, even if it's not exactly what we all want to hear, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting as well because Clem doesn't quite seem to get much out of it. Like she kind of starts to get a hint of what Guillermet is saying, but it feels like he's kind of putting seeds in there and knowing that they will grow.
Yeah, I definitely think she sort of ties it in to the Daniel stuff, obviously, but um, you're right. There's not that sort of moment of like I can do this. I'm gonna like push through. There's just this sort of, I guess, subtle recognition of what Guillermo's saying, that like there will be something to look forward to, and she doesn't sort of take a moment to process that from memory, but like it seems to work because she does go back to fighting and looking forward and trying to get Daniel, back on her side and stuff.
Mm. Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
true.
like because I guess the whole point of all this is it's just like I feel like that was sort of the big thing for me, is this sense of like you have to keep pushing forward and looking for the good stuff. It was like when Avery found Snowdrop, and she was
Yeah.
like, "I'm gonna keep looking for the good things in the paths, like Snowdrop. Like just like life's gonna be shit and hard and unfair, and like alongside trying to fix that, you also need to make sure that you are finding your own happiness."
Mm. Yeah, yeah. You're right. And I guess the point of what Gilma is trying to do here isn't necessarily to help Clem. It's just to manipulate things to go in the way that he wants them to.
It
So
can
I
be
guess he
both.
did a
I
good
hope it's
job.
both.
Yeah, it could be both, but it's not necessarily both, right?
Sure. I don't
Um,
know. I mean, I think Guillermo's message as well, because we're talking about how this applies to Clem. We'll talk about how it applies to Daniel and Verona as well. Um, isn't Guillermo the person who's about to sort of sink into the winter court because he's run out of stuff to do?
yes.
Like it's a bit ironic that the guy who's like, "Hey, it gets better," is the one who is kind of the one who's about to give up seemingly. Like that's sort of a fan theory that I've started treating as or do I try? I mean, because we got the confirmation he's only got his 2 adventures left or whatever. Um, yeah, like I don't know. This just feels like a big wrinkle to me in the where's Guillermo heading, because it's bizarre that like the guy who's about to sink into the winter court is the one who's telling everyone, hey, don't give up, keep fighting, the experience in itself is worth it.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And of course, we'll get to more of this discussion next chapter.
Yes, we've got various angles to look at this through.
Mm,
Um, Also quickly, should we talk about the earring?
yeah, yeah.
Clem's magical earring that makes people like her when she's wearing it, or try to steal it when she's not.
It's good, isn't it? And it's we see a little bit of how it behaves when it's in her ear throughout this chapter. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah, interesting.
I like it as this sort of it's like the essence of expensive jewelry kind of blown out of proportion, which is exactly how magic in this world works. Like if you think about the symbolism of expensive jewelry, at least to me, or through a certain lens or whatever, it's like, when you wear it, it's all about impressing people and getting people to like you.
Mm,
Um, and then like when you're not wearing it, it's basically just like a target to get robbed. um, and like how many movies are fucking centered around someone stealing like a precious gem, right?
mm,
Uh, so and even I think Kilmay says when she is wearing it, there's a hollowness to the connections she'll make. Like, since it's like if people only like you because you have like diamond earrings or something, that's probably not the foundation of the strongest like friendship.
yeah. Um, yeah. I think it's especially punishing for Clem with the fact that, I mean, we've heard her mention this kind of, I guess, fling that she had that felt like it could be more. Um, and now we've got this earring that makes people kind of want to please her and serve her, right? I don't know. It just feels like it's, the
Yeah.
universe giving her a big fuck you.
I mean, it is very concerning that it's like I think Guillermo was like, "Yeah, you should probably only use this once or whatever," and she sort of ends this whole thing with, "I'm going to keep it." Um, so that bodes not great, but I could see just how she would fall into this trap, because the appeal of this thing is just like it's going to make things easier for her. Like
Mm,
it'll smooth the tracks. Like you can't look past that. I can, yeah, that is very tempting.
mm, yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
she would have to use it on her partner
Well,
person.
of course she wouldn't have to, but it's. I don't know. We hear that the putting it in a box is enough to diffuse it completely, but I'm just I don't know. It's the kind of thing where once you've used it, I worry that it would just have kind of a permanent vibe around you of it. You know?
Oh, it seems very addicting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, Clem heads out to continue looking for Daniel, and is picked up by a driver along the way. And I think this is almost certainly the earring, right?
Yeah,
Like just
yeah.
somebody randomly being like, "Oh, let me give you a lift," and even at the end, they seem to be kind of a little bit
Yeah. Oh,
enamored
don't
with
go.
Clem.
Yeah, this person is just like way too okay with everything Clem is presenting. Like, it's just
Mm.
like, oh, where do you want to go? North? Okay. Like, if I picked up someone in the middle of the night and all this shit was going down and they're like, can you take me north? That's probably when I would be like, yeah, this isn't gonna work.
Yep. Yeah.
Um Uh, as well, like, because we actually kind of skipped over, like, she didn't just run into that family on the way to Guillemot. Like, there was a fucking weird dog seahorse monster in the river. She got attacked by some other guy and his dog. Um, like, she was just being bombarded with others, and then as soon as she forces the earring through her ear, which is not pierced, um, which got to me a lot more than a lot of the other horrifying things in this story. As soon as she
Mm.
puts it on, suddenly it's just, the world completely turns around. Like, of course she's going to get like addicted to using this thing.
Mm. Yeah, of course you would, right? I don't know. It's like a make everyone be nice and friendly to me device.
Yeah. Especially like after how things were when she was just holding it. Like, it's such a massive turnaround.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, Clem arrives at the scene and starts conversing with the Kenneteers.
Yeah, and I really like how we're kind of seeing the back half of this action scene from Clem's perspective, like from someone who has no clue. It's kind of like in 1.z when we saw the Kenneteers leap into action from Gabe's perspective. Like, it's just kind of fun. Like, we get to do a bit of detective work figuring out that like Lucy's been setting off goblin bombs and,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's just like Clem casts this very different lens of the fight than what we're used to, and it's fun kind of getting to flex our knowledge of the world by interpreting it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, there's a few like bomb things throughout this, and Clem's just like, "What the hell?" But we kind of know what's going on in the background.
Well, because
Um,
I think they say one of the things they sort of say is like, "Oh, I've only got like one ass blaster left." And one of the first things that happens when Clem arrives on scene is like all the people are running, and I think it says they were holding their asses. So like, I think the ass
I
blaster
didn't notice that.
I think the Ass Blaster, like, makes everyone
Made
explosively
everyone
fart or
shit their
something.
pants.
Something like that. Like,
Ay
yeah,
ay
we don't
ay.
know. It's just so it's such a fun and different way of engaging with, like, this insane fight scene.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. Speaking of fun things, Clem arrives and starts explaining the earring, saying, "Wearing it makes people like me or something?" And Avery's response is, "Oh, that explains it." Whew. Which is just great. Thirsty Avery.
Come on, Avery. Um, yeah, this chapter has, like, a handful of absolutely fantastic lines. We'll get to Daniel's just awesome one in a bit, but like we skipped over Guillemot's one where Clem is just sort of like, Why do you need me and Dan to leave?" And Guillemot's like, "Well, on top of other things, he's currently stabbing people like me." It's just
Mm.
such a good answer, especially for us as the audience with all the other context, because even Clem just sort of has to be like, "Yeah, fair enough. Like, can't argue with that logic."
Yep, fair enough. Uh, so yeah, they're chasing after Daniel now, and they kind of find their way into this tower, which is basically Van Gogh's Starry Night, right? Like this is as I didn't kind of realize until my second read through, but what I was picturing was exactly the painting Starry Night, where it's this big black tower kind of blending into this starry sky above this kind of small town. Almost exactly it is that. To the extent that it after I realized this, it kind of feels intentional.
I was not very familiar with this painting, like, until you wrote this in your notes, like, I googled it. I was only familiar with the actual starry part of the sky
Mm,
bit, and so, I went and looked it up, and you're right, it's like a giant spire over a small town, like, it definitely fits.
mm. I wonder if it's intentional. Wildbow confirm. We'll see.
But yeah, basically the TLDR of re-entering this scene is Operation Stop Daniel is
Yes.
not going very well.
No. Um, no. Yeah. He's kind of made this Fey tower that has taken form and is like warping the hostages, right? Basically turning them into uh, homages to a powerful fairy. What it seems to be.
Yeah, just sort of turning this into like even more of the fairy like that was sort of what came up in last week's chapters was Daniel was morphing that street into a kind of shitty reflection of the Dark Spring Court, and this is just like
Yes.
the next step up from that.
Yes. Yeah. I. I mean, it's horrifying, right? There's this young girl who's like unraveled in a very creepy way.
Yeah, even after the second time reading it, I'm not 100% sure I understand exactly what happened to the poor girl, but I mean, it's not good. Um,
Mm,
yeah, like there's just it's just such an escalation over what we saw, and especially seeing it through Clem's perspective. Like again, you're just sort of looking at all this, and you're just like, what the fuck? Like, what can they do against all of this? Like, it seems so like just insane.
mm, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of insect imagery, a lot of like unsettling kind of majesty, I guess you would call it.
Mm.
Yeah, creepy. Yeah. So yeah, Clementine, what is she, an orange? Clementine interrupts the song and is kind of punished for it. She gets dangled over the edge and then, falls slash is pushed.
Yeah, like yeah. I mean, I guess because we're kind of this is like a few thousand words of just insanity that happens in this tower, and like I guess we're gonna have to just skip over trying to explain what the fuck is happening in for all of it because this the I think the geometry and everything of all this kind of intentionally doesn't make complete sense, um, but there's so many good little bits snuck into this as well. Like Clementine notices how Avery gets the assist on Verona's save, and just after everything we talked about with Avery last week, it seemed perfect. And then Verona even does the like, yeah, we work best when we're together, and Avery gets a little choked up at hearing that because
Mm.
she really needed to hear that from someone else as well as herself. I think.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just a testament to like I feel like this is a recurring thing for Wildbow, but even when this bizarre fight scene in a fairy tower is going on, there's still little nice character moments always mixed in.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, often. I mean, that's the thing about this trio, right? Is they do just have this natural, constant awe of supporting each other, even in very tense moments.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of confirmed that Daniel's singing has at least done something to bring forth, a fairy or made this into an actual fairy realm. An actual fairy has come through, and now it's like getting serious. And it kind of made me connect it to what we first saw with when when Clem got here, with like the Carmine Beast aura making her, ratcheting up her Gilded Lilies shenanigans. And I guess we only see Daniel in this circumstance. I doubt he's this strong always, but I was kind of floored by how powerful he seems to be.
Yeah, the moment where they're sort of like, "Oh, he's getting help," I was like, "Oh, thank God!" Like, because that's terrifying if this is all Daniel. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I guess at least one fairy from the Dark Spring caught whiff of what was happening and was like, "Oh, this is fun," um,
mm,
and I guess funded his show.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this show is going really off the rails. Clem theorizes that Daniel's kind of inside the tower, and so they kind of bail after all the hostages are more or less free. They destroy it with a goblin stink bomb, and it all collapses. except for this one fairy who remains.
Yeah, and so there's sort of a little reveal here that gets set up a little bit, but it seems like this place wasn't as big as it appeared. Like Daniel
Mm,
was using mirrors to make the tower look bigger than it was, which I
yes.
I just love as a like we knew the tower was fake. Like we knew it was sort of all this stuff being glamoured up, but I still underestimated how fake it was. Like just there's so many layers of fakery and fuckery
Mm,
with this that caught me off guard. Like I just I love these stories so much that you can even fit in a little twist like this where I'm like, oh, of course the glamour tower wasn't as big as I thought it was.
mm. Yeah, well, yeah, of course. It's just more shenanigans, right?
Yep.
Um, so this remaining fairy, we get a description of him, and he has long black hair. Uh, in fact, his hair is jet black and so perfect it could be mistaken for the obsidian of the spire's construction. And he's also wearing a black silk kind of dress outfit. And I thought this was very interesting because it kind of reveals that the hostages that were being transformed were more or less being transformed into this man, right? Like the hair stuff, the silk stuff, very much the imagery of this man kind of reveals that he was the one that was behind the tower. And I guess I'm kind of curious if he and Daniel had some kind of relationship that made him the one that Daniel kind of called out to, or if they've never met before, or what it is. Um, just I'm sure there's some horrifying story there.
Yeah, well, I guess if we assume that this fairy showed up, when, like, if this fairy showed up when Daniel started getting to the point where he could build towers and shit, like when it really escalated, then like, yeah, if he was getting help from this fairy, it would make sense that some of the stuff he constructed was in its image because it like, that was his whole thing. Remember with like Marissa and Guillermo, he was trying to impress them so that they would like take him in.
Mm,
And that's like, so, kind of playing to the ego of the fairy from Dark Spring who popped in to help him out, like
mm,
that might have been what he was doing.
mm, yeah. Um, so yeah, we get an emotional moment with Daniel and this fairy, where Daniel considers going with him, but ends up choosing his mundane life and his, not to not to denigrate them, but his mundane friends.
Mundane in the not explicitly magical kind of
Or
way.
like, yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is such a beautifully heartbreaking scene. I especially because I think till now I'd mostly just been thinking of Daniel as a sort of like addict of some kind, mostly sort of drugs.
Mm,
Um, but the way that this is framed and with what we've learnt about the Dark Spring court in the meantime, it becomes pretty clear that it's a bit more nuanced than that in that, like, he's also fitting this sort of idea of, like, a child star who, got brought in and promised this brilliant life of fame or whatever, and then tossed aside when he hit puberty or whatever,
mm,
which kinda makes sense with how, like, clumsy he was in his own chapter.
yeah.
And, yeah, and, like, those 2 things aren't always separate. There are a lot of child stars who've, like, run into drug problems and stuff, and so, like, I don't think
Yes.
it's a coincidence that those 2 things, like, got a bit mixed up for me here, but, um, yeah, it's just a slightly different angle on this whole thing because he's not just chasing glamour as a substance, but he's chasing, like, the importance he felt in the court or the fact or the purpose.
Mm.
He explicitly calls out to not wanting to be a burden here, which, feels very targeted to one of our main characters. I won't say which. Um,
Well, it is
but
very. Well, that's the thing, right? Like, this is very. We had the parallel between Lucy's concern about Verona and her tying that to Daniel. And now we have Daniel literally making the choice between having connections with his human friends and family, or diving headfirst into magic but losing himself along the way. And that's not. I mean, that's almost as explicitly a parallel to Verona's situation as it can get, right?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And that was sort of like when I opened 5.5 and saw it was a Verona chapter, I was like, Well, yeah, it had to be, and of course, then we started to have that chat in the chapter because I was like, it's just such a natural follow on from what happens with Daniel here. Because, yeah, I mean, essentially, Clem makes this case that, like, you can get this fame or whatever, but it's not actually what you want. You're sort of doing it for them, or because they've told you it's important and it feels easier, but like you're gonna lose your people along the way. And yeah, as you said, like he chooses the people, and that's important because his big problem was he didn't want to be a burden.
Mm,
And
yeah.
Verona goes through the same thing in a minute.
Yes. Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. Next chapter, we don't see Verona make the connection to herself, but we definitely make it as the listeners, and I think Lucy makes it because she, you know,
Yeah.
puts it together. So yeah, we'll get to that next chapter, I suppose.
Yeah. In lighter news, I'm just going to read this entire bit Daniel has. Where so when Daniel makes this decision, and it's such a powerful moment, he makes this decision that he'd rather have his friends and family than this hollow fame that wears him out, and it's very powerful. And then I think it's Verona sort of mentions Sharon is waiting for them, and Daniel's just like, oh, Sharon's waiting, Clementine. What joy, what wonder, whoopee hooray, this drabby, sad, frustrating world is welcoming me with our favourite person in existence.
Mhm.
Sharon, my heart bursts. However could I have dreamed of that other life when Sharon is here?
It's pretty good,
Um,
isn't it?
yeah,
Oh, what a
I
champion.
it's the start of Daniel's complete turnaround in my head from scary to just hilarious. But I think it's also great because like I feel like this captures that lesson Guillermo is imparting on fucking everyone here very well because it's like it is so perfect that Daniel like chooses not that life and is immediately confronted with Sharon because that's just like the worst part of this life.
Mm.
Um, but, he can still go looking for the joy, like in this case by being a sarcastic asshole. Um, but yeah, like just even despite Sharon, there's still hope for a better future.
Yeah, yeah. It's some classic sarcasm there. I love it.
Yeah. Also, I think Verona again is like, oh, Sharon has a head wound, and Lucy's the only one who asks about it. Daniel and Clem
Mhm.
don't give a shit,
Yeah,
which
of
was just
course.
a nice little bit for me where I was just like, okay, good. Nobody really cares. Lucy's just like checking it's not too serious. But Daniel and Clem are like, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just very. I mean, this and next chapter, Sharon's plight is just completely ignored by everybody, and it's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, they regroup, and not only is everyone here, but also Melissa is here because that note from before was to Melissa's parents, telling them to tell Melissa to come here. I guess.
Yeah.
And Melissa looks at Clem, and Clem looks at Charles, and they all get visions of their future.
I mean, yeah, this is like a brilliant move by Guillermo. But it's also just exciting to see Charles through fresh eyes again because I'd forgotten how guiltily funny it is to just see him get roasted by someone when they first meet him. Like it's just always, is he a creep? He's balding, like he's scruffy. Like I just don't like him.
Mm.
Um, it gets us back in the zone of what Charles is so quickly, as well as just I shouldn't laugh at it, but I do.
Yeah. Oh, Charles. So yeah, this is a great play by Guillermo, and it's just like a slam dunk, right? Like get them all to forcefully confront their futures to see what horrifying paths they're going down. What a great way to deal with the Melissa and Clem situation at the same time. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's so good just giving each of them someone to point at and be like, "But wait, it gets worse." Uh, it's also like it fits into this overall lesson of the chapter in a really fun way as well because it's like a bit of an inversion where it's just like if you get tangled in this stuff, you won't have that hope for the future. Like, if you take this risk, you risk ending up like Charles or ending up like Clem. Like, the closer you go to this stuff, the closer you kind of get to being in a situation where it's all the grind and you don't have that, uh, you know, those moments of brightness in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does it work is the question. Does this dissuade either Melissa or Clem? I think the answer is no, but
But
it comes close.
yeah, I got the impression of no, at least for Melissa.
Mm,
Um, I mean, Clem brings up the interesting counter argument of like, hey, the Kenneteers seem to be doing all right. Um, but Charles sort of mentions it's because they have each other. And that feels like because community and like teamwork have been so important to this story. Like, everything we encounter has some sort of crew or group they're a part of. Like, you've got like Kennet as an institution, you've got the Blue Heron Institute. Like, it's all about how these groups are working together, and so that feels
mm,
like it will sort of be a core part of this story, like, as it ends, is like how the Kenneteers have done better because they have each other, and I mean, we see that we're about to see a huge instance of it next chapter.
mm,
Um, so clearly, what we need to do is awaken Clem with Daniel and Sharon.
yeah. Um, yeah. I wonder if what Gillimer has just done is made a kind of Charles's Angels with Melissa, Clem, Sharon, and Daniel all teaming up together. What a terrible team that would be.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but Melissa's gonna be interesting that, like, especially after the newspaper, I feel like we're definitely gonna be doing stuff with Melissa soon, and I have no idea where that's gonna go, so I can't wait to see.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, because I think I think what Guillermo tried to do here maybe works on Clem. I don't think it worked on Melissa at all.
mm,
Um, but yeah, yeah, like I keep coming back to this idea of it, like, it's people actually genuinely supporting each other, not just by rules, but by being good people. Like, that just keeps coming up in this story, and I keep sort of coming back to that as an idea for where these things might be going.
mm, mm.
Like
Yeah.
Daniel and Clem, in a way, they choose to stay with the people they know and love rather than their alternatives, and that's kind of why it feels good-ish.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Um, so we get this. Then we get to a kind of extension of that previous scene where Verona is trying to talk Clem out of being a tenant, but it doesn't seem to take.
It's so frustrating, Clem. Don't do it. Don't go back to Bristow. It's a terrible plan.
Yes. Uh, there's this part where Verona says they're talking about how Bristow makes it hard for Clem to leave, and Verona says, more than that, more than rent or utilities or whatever, he makes it hard to leave in the same way you find things, and that's just such a good thing to say to Clem as a way of like, hey. This isn't, you're being like not just manipulated, but like magically or whatever influenced. I That's such a horrifying thought, and the fact that that isn't enough to break Clem out of her her claim by Bristow is means that I think nothing could, right?
Yeah, and that, like, yeah, you're right. This is the sort of the point where I was like, oh, like, we're sort of seeing Bristow's claim in action because
Mm,
her mind keeps sort of turning to the reasons to stay. Um, and like the fact that it beat out her getting all those answers she wanted. Because on the one hand, I'm like, oh, this is good. Like, she's listening and she's not going to endanger herself. I feel like that is meant to be something we sort of consider the right call of just worrying about her own life and not digging deeper into this. But then on the other hand, I'm sort of like, but she could have done it and not gone back to Bristow.
mhm,
That part feels like a loss. So
mhm,
yeah, hopefully at the very least, like, they've sort of planted seeds of doubt. Like, Clem, I think, will be a lot less pro Bristow when she gets there. Uh, Shelley's obviously going to have conversations with Bristow, and Sharon, they say some of her anger will be directed at Bristow. I think when he can't answer her questions, he will start to find Sharon on the wrong side of his stick.
I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
We'll have to see. Yeah, it's interesting because Clem's, she rejects the answers that she's been looking for. She just never. I don't know. We'll have to see. And of course, this comes back to something that we haven't had resolved yet, which is Verona's little bet with
Yeah.
Bristow as well. Um, Although it's an
Because we
interesting one because, and I guess we didn't touch on this when it first came up. There's no time frame on when Bristow has to regret it by, right? So really, Verona's in an unlosable position there because Bristow can regret it at some point, but if he doesn't regret it, that just means he hasn't regretted it yet, you know? So
yeah,
maybe Verona's got a good point.
but if I were Bristow, I think like the way I would sort of get around that is basically at any point where Verona's saying you don't regret it yet, that's basically an implication of this isn't over, which means they're
Mm,
sort of still in conflict. And I think if they're still in conflict, that presumably means Bristow can like go after her without any karmic
true.
stuff. So it's sort of like she sort of has to cop being gainsaid um, to end hostilities between them at this point. And the
Mm,
thing is, we don't quite understand what that will look like in terms of how much power does she lose for how long. If she's
mm.
getting her power from the Kennet others, does that mean it affects them as a conglomerate? Like, how bad is it? Where exactly does the power loss come from? Yeah, like I don't know. I actually kind of hope she does get gainsaid just so we can see it and understand it a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, true. We still don't really understand gainsaying, right? Yeah. Um, so the tenants finally start to leave, but Clem drops a little bit of a hint on her way out, which spirals out into wait, we need to deal with this, which is the red fur, the carmine cube that she found.
I love moments like this in stories. These sort of mic drop moments stories get to do where you take dramatic irony and just like drop it on the characters. Just that moment of like we knew this was coming, and just to have Clem so casually be like, "Oh yeah, and there was some red fur," and then just like have all the other characters be like, "Wait, what? Like hold up, what?" Like that they're just always so fun. And this is a very good one.
Yes. Yeah. Um, it's. I mean, it's weird that it was just found by three rando teenagers, right? I mean, we'll talk about that more as we go. But it's just such an interesting
Yeah.
wrinkle. Just an interesting wrinkle, isn't it?
I was wondering if that is, like, because of Clem? Like, because she's got a whole Gilded Lily thing, which is kind of about putting these items in the hands of an innocent person like her.
Mm,
Is it sort of like, she rejected it, but then there was this sort of sense from the universe's perspective of like, well, we've sort of opened it up to the innocents now, like,
right,
and they had an easier time just sort of stumbling into it than they might have without Clem
right.
being around.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, Clem does think. I mean, we've had hints of bad things happen when she rejects. Um,
Hmm.
she rejects gifts from the universe, and that's pretty much explicitly what she did with the Carmine Cube. So maybe it's Clem's fault that these three are dead.
I wasn't gonna go that far, but she's like through a certain lens, sure.
No, I wouldn't go that far either. But um, just the universe kind of punishing Clem for not taking it, I guess.
Yeah, or yeah, not so much punishing it as just like her being around just sort of opened it for innocence to pick up, and it's just nice enough to give her first dibs when it does so.
Mm, yeah. Um, and that's the end of Backaway 5.C. Next up, we go into 5.5, where we're in Verona's head.
You wanted to say 5 V there, didn't you?
5.V, yes, that's the next one. Um, Backaway 5.5. We're in Verona's head, and Verona and the gang are heading out with the tenants to check out where Clem saw the Carmine Cube.
Yes, and we're immediately sort of thrown back into Verona's perspective, with like all this opening stuff, just really hitting us with how tired she is in like every way. And I found this as important because it's been a couple of weeks for us, but in this night alone, Verona's had her trip through the ruins. She's had the Alpi nightmare. She's had that fight with the ghost. All the shit that just went down with Daniel. Like, this night has been just emotionally torturing Verona over and over again. And she's in a very bad spot.
Mm, yes. Yeah, she's pretty unhappy. She's been holding on to the thought of magic school tomorrow, which, and I'm just kind of like
Sure.
that. That's no. There's no way that's happening, right? Like, isn't the town really fucked up right now? Are they just gonna ditch?
Even even if they did leave now to get back to the school, it's like 2 a.m. Like, she's gonna fall asleep in class, right? Like, she could just yeah, yeah. I mean, you can really see how out of it she is just with like she's actually taken like her mask and everything off. Like,
Mm,
she's choosing to be more human. She actually focuses on like all the bright things around where she's like, oh, the stars are bright, which is, normally she's like the darkness is my home.
mm,
So she talks about how far she's retreating into herself, and you sort of really see that with all this stuff going on in the text. And then yeah, she holds on to that one hope of magic school tomorrow, and I'm just like, oh, this doesn't feel healthy if that's all you've got.
yeah, it's yeah.
I mean,
I mean, yeah. Well, I would say I'm worried about Verona, but we kind of get the resolution of this to an extent within this chapter, so thank
yeah,
God.
yeah, true.
Um,
Um,
so yes. Uh, okay, actually, wait. Here's another thing I want to point out, which is there's a comment made by, I think, by Clem or by Daniel, saying, "Oh, this whoever this person was," referring to the comment beast, must have been something special, and everyone kind of chimes in with like, "Oh yeah, she was," and Charles's one is begrudging, and I know they have a history, but again, I'm just kind of like, everything Charles does is so suspicious.
it, it how is this? I honestly didn't get that vibe. I'm curious to hear from you. Like,
Just the
what's
fact that
suspicious
he's
about this?
begrudging about it is just, I don't know, like, just always suspicious to me in how he thinks about the Carmine Beast, I guess.
I mean, she did reject his like appeal to not be like the shit stain of the universe. So
Uh, Charles
I
talks
feel like
about
begrudging
Alexander.
is
Charles talks
fair.
about Alexander Belanger in this chapter, and is not. This is more venom than he has for Alex. You know.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't know. It's just because I saw someone else recently who was theorizing that Charles is the mastermind or the leader of all this, and I don't know if that if that is what I believe, but I'm also certainly going to be wrong about who done it. So I
Mm,
don't know.
yeah, true. True that you'll be wrong. I mean, we'll all be wrong. We'll see. So yes, and then of course we get more Sharon in the background, just no one paying attention to her. I wonder if she's gonna try and come back to Kennet just to fuck with people. There's a bit of a hint at that towards later in the chapter, but I don't think it's gonna happen. But oh my god, just she's just so having a bad time.
Hopefully, like, all the shit that goes down with Bristow or whatever will just kind of distract her from doing it too soon. But like, I feel like she would be back. It would be weird if she didn't try at some point.
Mm,
Um, but you're right. It is just kind of funny, like just these moments where like Verona's sight disappears, so she sort of has to like look at John and be like, "Can you just fuck with her a bit so that I can see again?" Um, yeah, she's just constantly like screaming. She's like baffled that Clem and Daniel would like betray her like this, and they seem to be the two who give the least shits that she's suffering right now. Like, it's like
yes,
it's
her
just
best friend and Daniel. That must be a
yeah,
reality check for her, hopefully.
I think I made that joke in my live read where I was like, if Sharon like breaks up with Clem as BFFs after this, then I think the trip will have been worth it.
Mm, yes. I don't know. We'll see.
Daniel's also again just back to being like fun and not scary. Like, he has this other great conversation with Avery and Lucy about them being teenage girls, where like Lucy's like, "We're not little girls," and he's like, "Well, you are." Like, that's why he's so nimble. Um,
Mm,
unless you're not girls, and Avery's like, we are girls, and then like Lucy has to like elbow her. It's fun.
Yes. Good stuff. So yeah, Verona goes off to gather some clues by just talking to a face in a drain, presumably some kind of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Oh, see, I went for a different reference. I was going to say we all float down here.
Yes, true. Yes, it's the little boy from it. Yeah, which so she just kind of okay. Well, here's the line. Verona walked down the road until she found a drain. She bent down and looked through with her sight. And that's all. She's just like, oh, I'll just go ask some random other in a drain. Oh, there'll be one over there, I'm sure. And then she's right. Like, what is this?
It,
How Kennet works now?
is that explicit? Oh, isn't the ground covered in blood? Maybe she just sort of assumed there'd be something there. Like,
True.
I don't know if she explicitly went to find a drain spirit,
Or just kind of
but
went to find a passerby and was like, oh, I'll just go look in that drain.
um, yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, it is classic Verona, where she just sees this weird meat thing in the drain, and she's like, "I'm gonna talk to you like a normal person."
Mm.
Um, it's like exact. I just love every time she does this. I don't think I'll ever get sick of Verona talking to creepy monsters casually. Um, and it feels important too because Avery and Lucy have sort of been doing all of the work until this point. Like it's all this really cool, like magical detective shit where like Avery's pulling on connections, Lucy's sort of sensing the aura and vibe of the area. And like up until this point, Verona's just kind of been walking around trying not to be a burden. Um,
Mm.
so it's like very good for her that she manages to find something useful.
Yeah, it just kind of works out perfectly, which is great. Of course, right as the things start to get spicy in the interview, Sharon interrupts and ruins things.
Yeah, which like okay, so there's like you know how we talked about how Bristow's claim interfered with Clem's ability to sort of accept their offer?
Mm.
To get Charles to tell her the stuff. And because there's a moment later in this chapter where I think Verona is sort of like, oh, that offer is still on the table. And then like the second they say that, Daniel and Sharon enter a bit of a screaming match and Clem has to run off. And I very much read that as like the spirits sort of butting in and establishing the claim. Like, the second they're sort of encouraging Clem to think about it more, the spirits are like, no, 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 you go back to Bristow.
Yeah.
And with that sort of spiritual interference in mind, I couldn't help but see that here on my second read with Verona as well, because it's like the second Verona starts explicitly asking about the driver, like I have absolutely no doubt this spirit was going to be able to tell her exactly who was driving that car.
Hmm.
The second we start to go down that train of thought, all this bullshit with Sharon comes up and we get distracted and Verona doesn't go back to visit this drain
No,
spirit.
she doesn't.
And if you just look at all the other times, like, when they were first in the ruins in Arc 2 and there was the Carmine Beast like trail, but they had to go and watch Melissa like lose her foot.
Mm.
There Avery almost found that clue right at the end of Arc 4 as they were going through the ruins, and then
Yes.
they had to keep moving, so she had to just sort of leave it. It's like every time they're about to crack or make a big solve in the case, some bullshit means that we have to leave it and not go back.
Yeah.
And I'm just starting to get real sus about that. Like it can't be a coincidence at this point.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's the clue in and of itself. What if the universe itself is kind of working against him in this? What's powerful enough to do that, right? I don't think any of the Kennet others are, even with like juice from the Carmine Beast. It makes me think that the most obvious suspect might be the judges.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did have the thought at one point of whether someone, I think it was in our Mile End Club, there was the talk in there about how alabasters can take the role of others if they think they're not doing it well.
Mm.
And I was sort of like, that would fit in if we're talking about like these embedded power structures and teamwork. It would be fitting for one of the Carmine's colleagues to have like killed it to take its power. Um, but I think we'd notice if the alabaster was in town on the regular. Um,
Mm.
I suppose it does have its minions or whatever that Avery met at the start of Arc 3.
Mm.
But
Yeah. Yeah. They did ask them about it and they denied it. So
yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the only other person we know who's that good at misdirection is.
Is Charles.
Yeah, like I don't know. I was still that's just I'm still on that weird interaction we had with Charles last week where he was like, "Oh, Miss is still gone, is she?" Like that was the
Yeah,
suspect Charles bit for me. I
yeah,
was like, "What the
true.
fuck does he mean by that?" Um
Ah, this story, everyone's so suspicious in a murder mystery.
Yeah, yeah, we could probably just have this conversation for hours. There's so many like, "Ooh, but," there's so much data to sort through. I love it.
Yep. So Sharon screams. This calls over a police car, who checks them out. Kind of drawn over by Sharon scream, and it seems just kind of Charles voodoo as well. And the trio more or less manages to talk their way out of it, with only a few minor promises being made.
Yeah, I mean, the way the police just have this sort of hate on for Charles, and they can't articulate why, but they keep coming back to wanting to punish him.
Yep.
I think we used to talk about Charles in terms of like being an ex-con, and that just feels so perfect here. Like, there's not really a reason for it, but the police are just they're looking for an excuse to go after him.
Yeah, 100%. Um, Poor Charles. But yeah, Clem also. I mean, this kind of conversation breaks out. Obviously, it's the police that's especially in the current political climate charged interaction, and Lucy clearly is fairly cautious there. As is Clem, who seems to have had some problematic experiences with police officers in the past.
Yeah, yeah, because obviously, like, sort of what happens here is it becomes quickly established that Lucy has been taught a very different way to deal with the police than Verona and Avery. Uh, as you said,
Yep.
there's a pretty obvious reason as to
Yep.
why her family in
Uh,
particular has had to learn a
which
different way.
is fair enough.
Yeah, like absolutely. Um, uh, and yeah, I really like this character moment bit where Clem kind of backs her up because you can see from Lucy's perspective how even when you're so close to someone like Avery and Verona, it would just kind of be frustrating that they don't get it in that way, like because the two of them are just sort of like, yeah, but I mean, it all worked out, and you can tell Lucy's just kind of going insane that they're not able to really see things from her perspective, and so it just must be so relieving to have Clem just show up and be like, yeah, no, sometimes it's just you're fucked either way.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah. Although, in fairness to the police officer, they are more or less kidnapping and abducting Sharon, right?
Yeah, but then in fairness to them, it's Sharon.
True, true. I think it cancels it out. It's um,
So, oh, are you kidnapping
yes,
someone? Ah, yeah, she's like an alt right YouTuber.
yes, but
As you
it's
were.
Sharon. We'd like to apply the Sharon defense. Oh, of course, yes. Please, on your way. The trio goes off to talk, and Lucy brings up that she's realized the significance of Verona's cat fantasy earlier tonight, and finally, this whole thread comes to a head.
Yeah, like here we go. This is not everything, but it's like it's so much of what Verona's entire arc has been leading up to. Like it's not like, you know, completely closed off now or anything, but this is a huge part of a huge part of the story.
Mm, yeah, um, and yeah, it's kind of confronting and traumatic for Verona, but it's her chance to let her in, which she does. We get into a pretty good place. Obviously, Verona is. I mean, it's traumatizing, right? Like, fair enough. It's traumatizing having
Yeah.
this conversation that Verona's even wanted to have finally start to unfold in front of her.
I really, really like the way it's described at the end of this section of like Verona's like, it feels like there's more boxes and weight inside of me, but it's been rearranged into a way that's more manageable. Because that's so how having really big emotional conversations like this feels. Like you come out of it and there's this sense of, oh shit, now there's more I have to do, but it's not stuck inside me and like I can deal with it now. Like I
Mm,
not to jump ahead a bit, like, I thought that that's such a fantastic way to describe how something like this feels.
Mm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I do like how right from the get go to go to the start of it, y you could tell we're not getting out of it because there's that moment where Lucy's like, "Is that the plan?" And Verona's like, "Well, it's a plan." And
Mm.
and then Lucy's just sort of like, "Okay, what are the other ones?"
Yeah.
And Verona has nothing, and
No
there's
other
just that moment where
plans.
yeah, it's like, "Okay, no, we're doing this." Like, you're not getting out of this, Verona.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like that moment where she finally lets them in, because Lucy's sort of like, "Why won't you let me in?" And Verona's just like, "'Cause, like, look at my dad, look at my mom. Like, I can't, I
Yeah,
can't
either
afford to
she
do that."
does let you in and becomes her dad, or she doesn't and becomes her mum, is what she thinks. Obviously falsely,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's rough.
yeah. Yeah, like this is such an emotional scene to read, and yeah, because so Verona's cat solution, like, I feel like this is the clearest insight into the motivation behind it that I've had. It's she either opens up and becomes her dad, is what she thinks, or she closes up and becomes her mum. So if she takes this third option of becoming a cat and just kind of not engaging with it, at least that's a decision she's making that is not her parents.
Do you know what I've just made the connection to, Elliot? I don't know if this is a fair connection or not, so you tell me. You know how um it's teenagers. It's especially teenagers. And it's this thing where I don't know if you had people like this in your school when you were in high school, Elliot, or middle school for the Americans. But people who would like kind of role play animals, especially cats and dogs, in the sense of they would kind of take on mannerisms similar to a cat or a dog, where they would like rub their head against somebody or something like that. That kind of like awkward thing that you do. And in my opinion, and I'm not, maybe I'm being a bit armchair psychiatrist here, but what it is a way to kind of normalize what was the stigma of like not it being uncool or unacceptable to like seek affection, but putting it through the lens of an animal kind of normalizes it or makes it okay, even though in this direction it definitely makes it a bit more weird. I'm kind of connecting that now to what Verona is doing in the sense that she wants to be able to show affection for her friends, but worries that she can't do it in a way that will make her like her dad. So all she can really do is kind of fit it into this box where it's acceptable to have affection, and that box is, a pet relationship.
I didn't have people like that at my school,
Okay.
but I went to a very weird school, so that could just be me.
Yes. Oh, such a
Um,
weird school. You didn't have people pretending to be cats and dogs.
um, yeah, I think there's something to that. I think Verona's thinking about it differently because her goal is to just chop that part out of her. Like, I think it's no
Mm.
accident that snippet when we got her bedtime reading after 4.5, it was specifically the thing we were reading about was like how to chop parts out of yourself, and I feel like
Yes,
what she wants
true.
to chop out is that part that is like emotional, I guess,
Mm.
or the sort of emotions that come to being a burden.
Mm.
Um, yeah, like I sort of connected it more to this. Like she has this idea. I had friends in high school, middle school who that person who like doesn't like anything that's mainstream because they don't want to be like typical or anything. So they always hate something that's mainstream and they like the things that are different.
Yeah.
And I mean, like it's a trap I fall into every now and then, as well. But because it's that whole thing where it's like if you are choosing to like things based on whether they're popular or not, you're
Yeah.
just as controlled by what's popular as the
Yes,
people
of
who just
course.
like things because they're popular.
Yeah.
Um, and, like, that's sort of the counter argument I would make to Verona's case here is, like, going for some radical third choice of becoming a cat is still sort of letting your parents define your decision
Mm.
as much as going the other way, and, like, that's not to say I have a better solution or, like, everything we do is probably gonna be defined by our parents regardless of how you look at it, like, that shit's always gonna be traceable, especially with a relationship to your parents like Verona has. Um, but, like, I think the idea that becoming a cat is escaping your parents controlling the decision is something that doesn't ring true to me.
Mm. Mm. Fair enough. Yeah, you're right that she has, well, not almost, she has explicitly talked about cutting parts of her humanity away. So maybe my analogy isn't quite correct. I think it is just the fact that it's a cat that makes it stick out to me. Um,
I think it is like a fair comparison to sort of what she's thinking, because that is what she's trying to do is find a way to allow herself to function without turning into either of her parents, and that is turning into an animal. It's kind of a magical, blown into 1,000 times version of like the real problem.
mm, yeah. Um, so yeah, Lucy and Avery vow that they won't let her nightmare come true, and when we get the resolution of this idea.
Yeah, yeah. Like I love this moment so much. There's a bit in the text where, um, I think it's Lucy is like, Verona, you need to take 5 seconds, or maybe it's Avery. One of them tells Verona to take 5 seconds, and each one of those 5 seconds is its own paragraph, and it's so powerful just to like make us as readers also really feel that pause, because I think everyone's probably emotionally driven as they're reading this
Mm,
segment. So it's like a pause just as much for us as it is for Verona. It's really cool.
mm, yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah. So yeah, we get the vows. Uh, actually, maybe we should touch a bit more on as we get up to it. The way that Lucy responds in this situation, which is, I think she's again just she's so good at this. She is supportive to Verona, but not letting Verona just be negative, right? She prods and pushes Verona enough to get to the heart of the conversation while still supporting her. Like, man, Lucy, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. Lucy handles this conversation better than I think I would have been able to.
Mm,
Um, eh, I think she does such a good job of like actually listening to Verona, like making it clear that she's hearing and understanding Verona, but at the same time, sort of beginning to challenge those like conclusions. But like that's sort of easier to do when you make it clear that it's like I am hearing what you're saying, and like I understand what you're feeling. I just think like your conclusion is wrong because like blah blah blah. Like I think that's sort of why it works so well.
mm, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, and, like obviously Avery does well as the in text and out of text third party here. Uh, there's that moment where like Avery butts in and then they make the like all the butt joke, and it's just such a shit joke, but that's like the reason that they all fall into this like giggling fit. And I think that was the moment that impacted me the most in this whole section, because there's something about, like, being in the middle of, like, a serious conversation, like a fight. I don't wanna call this a fight, but it's, like, fight adjacent. It's, like, a really emotional conversation, and to just be able to
Yes.
take a 30-second break for that to laugh at, like, a not even good butt joke.
Well, it's a
um
tension release, right?
yeah, yeah, and then just to come back and segue back in the conversation, like, that's to me when you really feel how tight the bond is here, that this conversation can survive the butt interruption, um, and then get, like, back on track. I don't know, for some reason, that to me is just, like that was the moment where I was like, "These 3 are gonna be alright because 'cause they've got each other."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so great. I mean, it's such a great moment. Y- we've kind of been thinking about Verona and how she can get her way out of this, but it's something that she can't get out of herself, right? And it's like she needs firmer reaffirmation to be her kind of base, her foundation of support here. And this is such a tangible affirmation. It's literally them. I mean, that's the thing about magic, right? Is they can magically bind themselves to guarantee that they will support her, and it's more than she would ever have asked for. But it's also so helpful to get her into a better place.
Yeah, because like, one of the core facets of the other verse from a, like, "This is how I sell it as a story," is this mechanic of practitioners and others having to tell the truth. And
Mm,
because what it means is, like, promises mean so much in the story, and that just, like, this is you're right, this is just an example of why that's so important. Because like, in any other story, the moment where they're like, "We promise we won't let that happen to you." It would feel big, but, like, the knowledge that this is a promise they legitimately have to keep, it
mm,
makes it so much bigger and better, and I mean, that's just
yes.
what the other verse is about, it's about using these mechanics to make these moments bigger through the
Yeah, to
magic,
kind of
and it's
amplify the drama, I guess.
yeah, and it's yeah, it's so cool, like, the fact that Yeah, like, the fact that practitioners have to tell the truth is always one of the first things I go to when I'm trying to sell this universe. Like, I just think it's a fantastic mechanic on top of, like, the spirits and everything else, which are a bit harder to one sentence summarize.
Mm,
Um, yeah. And
yeah.
and as you said, like, Verona is lifted up by the others. Like, if we go back to her nightmare that she had, like, what
Hmm.
was kind of truly horrifying about that nightmare was, like, the only person she had was Melissa.
Yes,
Um,
she'd been given
and
up on by, or
yeah.
no, she hadn't. She had given up on being helped, I guess.
Well, it was still like Avery drifted off, and then it was like Lucy gave these like token efforts of like Lucy went as far as, oh, come and have dinner with me, and didn't really fight Verona saying no.
Mm,
And what the difference is between the nightmare and real life is that Lucy's like, no, fuck that. I'm going to put myself in a position where I'm not allowed to do that. Like, I will fight for you,
yeah.
and like, while we're tying it to the nightmare, remember the nightmares, I think we talked about this when Verona had a nightmare, like, they were
Mm,
originally introduced in terms of her dad, and it was like, "Oh, the nightmares either make people worse or they make them better." And for Verona, it's actually kind of helping because what she was able to do is then express this concern to her friends, and her friends were able to lift her up. And like, that's what Verona's dad doesn't have. Like, he doesn't have a Lucy or an Avery to,
true.
like, the only person he's got in his life is Verona, and he's poisoned the fuck out of that relationship.
Yeah,
Um,
and we'll get to that as well.
yeah. But yeah, it's just, like, to come back to the themes of like teamwork and community in this story, like, that's Verona doesn't lift herself up here. These nightmares and stuff help her articulate how she's feeling to the people who do matter, and they are able to lift her up. And
Yeah,
it was the same with Daniel and Clem. Like,
yeah,
they got through it together.
yeah, true. Yeah, it's just beautiful. It's lovely.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. This conversation is such an important part of the story as a whole to me. Like, this is, Verona wanting to turn into an other has been a thing since Arc One. So I think this was a big emotional beat for the entire story, and it worked perfectly for me. Like, absolutely delivered on.
mm, yeah, yeah. It's not perfect because there's this thread throughout this entirety of this chapter where Verona kind of thinks to herself that she doesn't want to be a crybaby, and she thinks it during this scene as well. And it's just like, Verona, let yourself have emotions. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, that said, like, this isn't the end of the problem. Like, we're going to talk about her dad in a minute, and
Yeah.
we didn't fix things. All we did was, like, got everyone on the same page where, like, Lucy and Avery have promised to help her. She's promised not to turn into a cat without actually checking with them first. So it's not the end of Rona's story, but it's such a huge chapter for her to actually be able to express this properly to Lucy and Avery.
Mm,
Yeah, like,
yeah.
it's so good.
um,
Also, side note, we should talk about, like, Avery literally starts to glow with her little check marks and the letters she writes on herself, as she had, like, Avery has her own little, like, badass moment of like, I will join this vow, and she, like, her gold check marks start glowing, which to me was like, her confidence in herself and just her being so awesome right now that the glamour is sort of glowing.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Which let's read as a positive. Yeah.
I'm choosing to. I'm still team Guillermet is secretly not the worst, and,
Hmm.
like, this is the sort of thing where, if glamour represents the lies we tell ourselves, it's just kind of canceling out the ones Avery's doing. It's like, for Daniel, it was a harmful drug, but for Avery, with this tight prescription she's getting from Dr. Guillermet, like,
Mm,
maybe it's helpful. It's like I think Adderall, like, Adderall's, like, prescribed for people with ADHD,
right.
but I'm pretty sure it's actually, like, it's an amphetamine, right? Like, it's very similar chemically to meth and has kind of similar effects on the body. It's just, for people with ADHD, that's what their brain needs. Whereas for someone who doesn't have ADHD, it's not what you need.
Mm,
Um, maybe glamour can be the same. Like, maybe just a regulated use of glamour is something that can help Avery.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe. Maybe. Um, you're
Sometimes
right.
we need to tell lies to ourselves a bit to keep our sanity,
Yes.
or to cancel out the lies we're already telling ourselves. Like, because Avery's constantly beating herself down.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's a way to read it. It's hard to, it's still worrying. I don't know.
I have faith. I have faith in Guillemay and his checkmark solution.
Okay, we will see. Um, so yes, the trio rejoins the rest of the crew, and they drive on and catch up to the teenagers' car, which has crashed in the ditch in a ditch, with the teenagers and the Carmine cube nowhere to be found.
Yes, the mystery deepens for a little bit at least. The extra material this week kind of clarifies exactly what's happened here.
Mm.
I think.
Yes, we. I guess we can get to that later. There's a bit of kind of timeline thoughts, but I think we'll get to that during the newspaper because it does clarify some of this stuff for us.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just get there. But like overall, my takeaway from this whole thing is it's a mess.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, next they kind of follow along. They're kind of exploring, poking around, and before the tenants head off, Verona takes Sharon's laptop and just kind of messes with it a bunch, just as a final kind of fuck you.
Uh, Yeah, I mean, this is great. I especially love there's like a moment where Verona starts going through and like deleting videos, and Lucy's like, "Hold on, guys. Like, I know she's shit and her career is shit, but let's not like ruin her livelihood. That might be bad karma." And
Yeah,
Verona just sort of passes the laptop over to her and like shows her what she's deleting,
yeah,
and Lucy just kind of immediately 180s, and it's just like, "Yeah, let's do it."
yeah. I don't know.
Like how shit how shit is this content?
Of course,
Lucy just took one look at it and was just like, "Yeah, okay, let's get this out of the world."
I mean, I feel a bit skeevy about it, but also it's Sharon. I mean, it's like Walbo's gonna try hard to make us, um, to make us relate to Sharon a bit or feel for Sharon a bit, but yeah, I don't know. It's not. It doesn't quite get there.
Yeah, no, I was definitely on team delete toxic garbage.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, the trio then speak with Charles a bit and pick his brain a bit about the BHI, which is nice, filling in some blanks there.
Yeah, this conversation that maybe should have happened a while ago, Charles. Like, why didn't he tell them about the other people?
Yeah. Something that it's kind of raised for me that I hadn't really considered before is, you know, obviously we know Alex is a snake, but Charles had a closer connection with Ray and Durachet than we really thought, or than I had
Yeah.
kind of clicked onto. Um, is Ray fine with what happened? I mean, Durachet I could see being okay with it, whatever. But Ray, at least back then, especially when he was still Rad Ray Sunshine, like, is he fine with what happened?
Well, I suppose Charles wasn't part of the crew, right? He described himself as like, this specialist, the animal trainer. Like
Mm,
he wasn't a part of the main crew. He was like tangential to it. So he may not have but like something that Charles talks about here is when he was around these people that you sort of have to make excuses for and that are kind of shitty, it's not as hard as you'd like it to be. And
mm,
maybe Durachet and Ray are kind of there. Because I think that rings very true to me that like when you just are around shitty people all the time, it just sort of infects you a bit and it becomes a lot easier to excuse that behavior and not question it.
mm,
So, like, maybe they're too stuck in the sort of bullshit system Alexander thrives in to have genuinely thought about it much.
mm. Yeah, I guess that feels like a bit of a cop out though. Like, I mean, I guess that's what it. I mean, that's what we're talking about with practitioners is that they don't think enough about the systems that are propping them up. I guess, and
Yeah,
this is
like
just
that's not
another
to say
example
that
of it.
they shouldn't. Yeah, like this isn't to say that they shouldn't feel guilty about it or they shouldn't be forced to confront it. I'm just saying like it may not have they may just sort of have been in the system long enough that it just didn't really register as important to them or that important.
Mm,
And like that is something we should challenge because that's exactly the problem is if you spend all your time around like business people or whatever if you're around CEOs all the time you may start to think of like what like minimum wage workers as numbers like just that
yeah.
thinking will infect your way of thinking if that's what you're around all the time. and that's exactly what we do need to change.
Yeah.
Like, you can imagine the Kennetys going to Ray and being like, "What did you think of Charles?" And Ray just sort of being like, "Yeah, what happened to that guy?" Or like, "Oh," like, kind of avoiding the question because he doesn't wanna think about it, and them sort of being able to challenge that. It's like, "No, that's a really shitty thing to do. This guy's life was completely ruined over fucking nothing."
Yeah. Yeah. I yeah, I don't know. It's it's crazy that they. I mean, I guess we don't know that nothing has come from. We don't know that Ray hasn't done something to try and support Charles. I guess, but there's been
Yeah.
no evidence of it,
Yeah,
so we also
yeah,
have no reason to think that that would be there.
yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, I hope that this will lead to a conversation where, like, next time we're talking with Ray or Durashay, that the Candidates bring it up.
Mm, yeah, yeah, we'll see. So yeah, then we kind of get back into Kennet, and the trio are hanging out with Edith now, going around and just like cleaning up all the stuff that snuck in.
Yeah, and are we sure Edith isn't an ice spirit because she's fucking cold blooded
This
in
is
this?
brutal, isn't it? Um, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that not only does Edith go around killing these folks, fine, um, but Edith is also
Maybe.
collecting their hearts. She collects their hearts and adds it to a pile of hearts. Edith, what are you doing? Why is that not being questioned?
My theory on that is that she's doing that to help rebuild the perimeter. That kind of
Oh
sounds
god, I
like the
hope
sort of
so.
shit Charles would have used to build the
Yeah,
perimeter.
yeah, true.
But it's certainly like, again, I know I went off on this last week and I'm gonna do it again here, but like this sort of shit is exactly kind of like, is Kenneth really all that like, if they're building this on the heart of people they didn't like getting in, um 'cause, like,
Ah,
I think it was last week that I was advocating for we should question why they didn't let the pig dog man in.
mm,
Um, and this is sort of an extension of that. Like, there feels like a bit of an elitism to Kennet in the sense of like they're very selective about which others seem to be allowed in. Um,
mm,
like Edith says, "Oh, we're going to have to grow the town, but we'll be very careful about who we bring in."
yeah,
Um, which is funny because they let like 6 extra goblins in a while ago, and that was barely an afterthought, apparently.
mm,
Um, but like the other person we have here is this guy with the number on his back,
y-
and yeah, like they don't let him in, and I get that, but at the same time, now whenever they're not letting another in, it's sort of like, I feel like that's a data point for us to sort of look at it and be like, well, who is allowed in? Why does some people get to make the cut and not others?
yeah. I mean, so we know, for example, Pig Dog Man applied last time, right, and didn't make the
Yeah.
cut. Is he going to make the cut this time? That's a question that I have. Um, I don't know. I don't think so. I hope not. Fuck. But we'll have to see when we get some new characters added to the mix. What's what data points that gives us. You're right.
See, you say I hope not for Mr. Pig Dog Man, but if he's abiding by the rules of Kennet, like, is
True.
he? Maybe he's not that bad. Like, that's this whole thing for me is like Kennet has these sort of rules, and it's like, okay, you're just evicting people who can't follow them, or like, because we talk so much about how the Blue Heron Institute is elitist because they're only allowing humans and it's only rich people who can pay the tuition that get
Mm.
in. Um, Kennet yeah, Kennett's so selective about which others are sort of allowed in that I can't help but feel that they've got their own version of these entry criteria.
Well, presumably it's just, can we find a set of rules that you'll agree to that is not super disruptive? I mean, why would they turn someone away who's a docile other? I don't think they
Yeah, but
would.
like, okay, we had the Hungry Choir in town.
Right.
Like
Presumably the Hungry Choir agreed to some level of. I mean, no, they didn't, did they?
they took Gabe. There's just this high horse they seem to be sitting on. Like, and of like, oh, we can't let the pig dog man in. He's this like foul
Yeah.
boogeyman or whatever.
Yeah. The
Um,
Hungry
but it's
Choir
like,
invalidates that completely. But maybe they couldn't stop the
I don't
Hungry
think they.
Choir. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the Hungry Choir was very much a nobody wanted it there. They just couldn't get rid of it.
Accidentally had it be created with a Yolda stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, I don't it's just like, yeah, like, I don't know, all this stuff. I'm just curious still to learn what are these decision points they're using to decide, and
I,
that's why I can't wait to see who we meet as the new people, and because presumably there'll be a discussion there about, like, what old rules were we using to pick people, like, and why did we sacrifice them here, and because that's something I just really wanna get into, I think. They'll tell me a lot about what Kennet is.
the thing about it is, though, like when they say, "Oh, we're going to have to let more people in," what that really means is we're going to have to relax our standards for what level of collateral damage we find acceptable. That's really what is going to have to happen, right? Um,
Yeah.
which is worrying.
Well, but that's gonna tell us so much about what their priorities are, what
True.
their priorities were, like, what
Yeah.
restrictions existed,
Yeah.
and why are we relaxing them? Like, there's so much info to be mined there about the foundation of the town and what Mrs. secret plan for it was.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
But, hold
Mm,
on, but before we move on, can we also talk about this guy,
the number
just,
man.
like, on his
Yeah.
own?
Yeah.
The guy with the number in his back? Yeah. Because okay. So his whole thing was these people can sign up to have this number put on their back, and then when they reach 7,919, uh, like there's a mini apocalypse, a sort of localized apocalypse there. Um,
Hmm.
a- and so there's a sense of like, oh, it's kind of a shitty thing to do to sign up for it, but at the same time, it's like when you do, you get a bunch of like
Low level
boons.
perks. Yeah.
And this guy sort of explains he's an other, and it's like the only difference he has from a human, according to him, is like he can swim well and breathe underwater,
Yep.
but he gets hurt by all of the bullshit that gets thrown at others. Like kind of similar to Matthew and Edith in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, of like shot down just for being not quite human.
Not
Um,
worth it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like this isn't the sort of person that needs to get targeted by any of this stuff, seemingly. And so it kind of seems like you can see why someone like that would take this deal where it like sort of protects him, and it feels kind of shitty because then he can't get into Kennet because he's got this number, and it's sort of like if he'd gotten here first, maybe he would get into Kennet. Like
Mm.
I feel sorry for the guy. It's sort of like, people who work for like the petroleum industry or something, where it's sort of like, you're enabling an industry that's killing our planet and bringing on climate change or whatever. But if you look at like an individual ground level worker, I also get why
Well, people need to eat,
you,
right? People need to
yeah,
survive.
you need a job, and so it's like I can see why you've made that choice, and I can't begrudge it to you foolingly. Yeah, that's what I sort of see with this guy is he's like just this ground level person. It's like he didn't have access to Kennet when he made that choice, presumably. Um,
Having said that, though, if it was, if let's say if BP had a public mission statement where they said, and as soon as we get 8,000 employees, we're going to launch a bunch of nukes, right? You'd kind of be like, you know what? Maybe I can be a little less empathetic to people who sign on to work for them.
is it just because there's not as concrete a number on it? I mean, I don't think that's not
I think
kind of what
8,000
something
is a
like that
really low.
represents.
8,000 is a low number, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's a
But like,
really low number. It's a lot. I mean, I guess I get that it's an exaggeration of this of the principle of like people not being able to comprehend small contributions contributing to this kind of global problem and not really understanding the scale of that. But man, putting it uh, in terms of just 8,000 people, I'd be like, shit, man, that's like a really like if you're agreeing to be one of the 8,000, not even 8,000, 7,900, right? Then it's like, I don't know, that's a low number.
yeah, but something like BP is global. If you know that this is only happening in like rural Canada, like maybe this is only happening in one corner of Ontario, right?
Mm.
So you'd be a little bit easy to sort of be like, oh, if it's just me and I really need this, then I can see someone making that choice. I can see myself getting desperate enough to make that choice, and then feeling kind of shitty about it, and not or feeling like I still kind of judge this guy for taking this choice. Like I get that his life was hard and shit beforehand, but also being one of 8,000 people who might cause the death of millions is a shitty thing to do.
Yes, it is. I guess the distinction is I think it's fine that this person, well, maybe not fine. I'm more okay with this person being murdered than with a random employee of BP being murdered because it's so obviously like you making that choice is on a much higher level of selfishness, you know?
I mean, I don't know. I think about the oil spills that happen every year or two, and I don't see it. Yeah, I don't know. I
Mm,
get what you're saying. I don't know if I discern the difference as much.
fair enough, I
I
suppose.
think especially because he's already made the deal is
Yes.
the other thing as well. Like, as long as you could stop him from reproducing, um, somehow, I don't know. Wait, I guess they couldn't get him to agree to that, so they just have to sabotage his dating efforts.
Well,
Um,
but wait, I thought killing
but
him
you
reduces the
know,
number
like,
by one still, right? Like, it's like a
oh, does it
culling.
have to be 8,000
8,000
simultaneously?
alive is my read. Because then Edith delivers her badass
Right.
line of
Yeah.
adjust your count to be one lower and blasts his
Right.
heart.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I'm at the point where we'll start talking in circles about this.
Yeah. So, of course, it's a Verona chapter. And so we get to the part that we all knew was coming. Verona goes on ahead to speak with her dad.
Yeah. Which, if you transport yourself back about a month, that was the primary reason we were going to come to Kennet at one point tonight. Um.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's really not in good shape, right? Like, we see him and we kind of threw around some ideas about is he faking this to get her back? That's gone. He clearly is in a bad enough state that he actually genuinely needs her to be a caretaker for him in the short term.
Yeah. I think I always assumed that was probably going to be the case, just because that is actually worse. That
Yes.
he genuinely needs someone to care for him for these 8 weeks or whatever.
Mm,
He's made it clear he's not in the financial position to hire someone to do that, like, because all he ever fucking talks about is how much money shit costs. So yeah, I mean, like, who else could he get to do it apart from Verona? Like, he can't afford to hire someone. Like, so yeah, Verona makes that comment of like, Alpi, you better step your nightmare shit up because this is so much worse. And it's
mm,
like, yeah, it is. This feels so unavoidable.
yeah. Um, yeah. And yeah. I it's interesting. I know that it's not gonna last, but he does at least seem to be trying to be good. Like he makes a lot of genuine efforts to be the best we've seen him, right?
I think for once it's because he kind of is in. Well, he's more right to be asking of this than he usually is when he asks Verona for stuff, and I think for once, he sort of understands that he's asking something serious of her, and he's like treating it with the appropriate weight. Like, I think that's sort of what it is. Is like, even he sort of realizes that, like, he genuinely needs this help, and he is asking a lot of Verona to ask her to do it for him.
Mm, mm, yeah. There's, I mean, the moment where it turns for me is he's being very appreciative. He's being as good as we've seen him, and then he says, "Verona, I really do appreciate this. Could you get me a ginger ale from the kitchen and open a second one to let it go flat?" And that by itself is very innocuous, right? That's fine. That's a normal request, whatever. In isolation, there would be nothing weird about that. But it's just like it feels exactly like the weird, like bossing her around power trip stuff that he's expressed in the past. I don't know what it is. Just the fact it's the and open a second one to let it go flat, which is just such a slightly strange, weird power trip kind of request that it
it,
just yeah
it just feels so indicative of what the next 8 weeks are going to be.
yes
Right? Like,
yes
it's sort of like, "Hey, I do really appreciate this," and then it just sort of already puts her to work. Like, I think I talked about, like, how I felt a little bit Verona's daddy when I fucked up my leg a couple of months ago,
mm,
and I definitely had this moment with my housemate where it was sort of like, "Oh, like, I can't really walk properly or anything, like, you know, are you in a position to help me out, like, a little bit with some stuff?" And she was like, "Yeah, like, of course." And then it was sort of like, because I was, like, sitting there and I couldn't really get up, I was like, "Could you get me a glass of water?" And it was like the fact that I had to ask as soon as she'd sort of agreed to it felt shitty because I was sort of like, "Hey, can you help me?" She's like, yeah, I was like, "Cool." For starters, like I felt shitty doing that, and I sort of feel like that it's that same shittiness that her dad is leaning into here, where it's just like the second she sort of like he thinks she's agreed to help out, that he's just sort of like, okay, well, first task.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah, it definitely is like a flag of like, hey, things are going to be rough for 8 weeks. And that's the last thing that he says to Verona before she goes off and makes a diagram, breaks the connection, ensuring that she can slip away.
Oh, I don't know with this. Like, okay, is Pale Reflections as a podcast? Are we pro Verona drawing this diagram or not?
Mm. I am not pro. I mean, fuck, I don't know. I guess I'm pro against it in the short term. Pro for it, sorry, in the short term. But it has this sense of a real sense of finality to it. I guess the fact that it's 8 weeks, like this is a diagram that she's set up to last for 8 weeks, which means she's not coming home for 8 weeks. That's enough that she might just be like, well, let's just make it forever, you know? And I guess that's fine. I guess that's good. It just feels rough.
Yeah, I mean, even in the short term for me, I can't decide if I think she did the right thing here because I don't want her to stay. That's obviously the worst, but just leaving him by himself and cutting him off like this also just feels like, I don't know. Sometimes you do need to go no contact from your parents, and if that's what she's doing here, I can't bring myself to say that it's wrong, but at the same time, doing it like this doesn't feel right.
Mm,
I don't know. I feel like I could
yeah,
talk about this for hours and still not feel confident in how I feel about this. It's such a fucking mess.
it is. It is. And even Verona has this sense that it's wrong. Um,
Yeah, well, doesn't she sort of think to herself as she's doing it, like she has to do this? She can't just tell him no because he might give her a reason that works. Like, so even in her head, there's a sense of there is probably a scenario where I feel this is the right thing to do, and I'm not willing to confront that, which adds a sort of a bit of a dirty aftertaste to it.
mm, yeah.
But also, she can't do it. She can't, like she could, like you can't. Can we make Charles do it? Does Charles have a? Can Charles just be Verona's dad's nurse for a couple of weeks?
Would that
Or,
help anything?
I mean, it means Verona doesn't have to do it.
True. It would help with that.
I mean, would that be? Would you rather be Verona's dad's carer for 8 weeks or take on Louisa's like illnesses?
Mm, yeah.
That could be our discussion
Yeah,
question.
good discussion. Leave your answers in the
Submit your
discussion
answer.
threads.
Submit your answers now. What is the worst thing? Has Charles done anything worse than be Verona's dad's nurse for 8 weeks?
That's it. He'll have to draw the line there, surely. So yeah, I guess we will see how how permanent the ramifications of Verona's diagram and decisions here are. We don't know for sure, so I guess we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. But that takes us out of 5.5 and brings us into the bonus material, which is the Kennet Caller. The newspaper, the local town paper around Kennet, helps us find out all the things going on around town. Main story, of course, the headline being the missing three teenagers.
I mean, this is extremely entertaining as a premise for an extra material segment. Like,
Mm,
just it's a lot of fun getting to see things through the kind of innocence perspective.
yes.
Uh, all the extra little Easter eggs Wildbow got to chuck in. Like, it's just a very fun premise. This is a great
Yeah.
chunk of extra material.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? There's I mean, yeah, I love seeing things from the innocent perspectives, but we something that I liked here is that we get a bit of a time frame in the paper for the accident and the three boys' murder. And it was kind of hard to use this to rule out anybody as being suspects based on the time fuckery that happened from the watch. But we do get some specific hard timelines here. So let's run through it. The accident, the car crash, happened at 8:25. The three boys didn't leave the scene until 9:30. They stuck around, were talking to police, whatever, until 9:30. Left the scene around 9:30 and presumably died around 15 minutes later, which is 9:45. Yeah? So we've got a
Okay.
clear kind of timeline here, which means whoever did the murder needed to have been presumably, well, if it was the same person, I guess is the point. Needed
That's
to
an assumption I'm making. Yeah.
Yeah. So needed to be at the crash site at 8:25 and then go to catch up to the boys and presumably was there until left right after the crash and then came back to chase them down or something afterwards, right? Or was there
Yeah.
the whole time. So needed to be unoccupied at 9:45 basically.
So there's only like an hour, less than an hour and a half window there for them to have actually been elsewhere.
Yes. Here's the other things that we know that we can help to place timelines in this. Based on Sharon's phone bonus material, we know she left the scene. She messaged Clem and left the scene at 8:49. So 20 minutes after. Good. And then Sharon turned off her phone at around midnight, which indicates that Clem was still entranced by then. So that kind of helps us play out the timelines a bit. In Lucy's chapter 5.1, she identifies that it's 9 p.m. when she catches up to the three people outside the cave before she conflicts with Daniel. So with that in place, we can pretty much identify it's not Guillerme or Marisica because from 9 p.m. onwards, they are accounted for, right? And that also means that it's probably about 8:50 when Verona and Avery split off from Lucy, which means Verona is probably with Matthew until at least around, I don't know, like 10 or 11. So Matthew, I think, also has an alibi. Probably Edith and Alpi as well, although that's a little bit less certain.
Right.
And that's all I've got.
Yeah, John didn't show up till the end of the stuff with Sharon, which was like
No,
midnight or
John was with
afterwards.
Lucy as well at around 9 o'clock.
Oh shit, no, he was too. He was too.
So maybe he went off and did something in that time. That is possible. But it
Not
leaves
not all of the goblins are accounted for.
yes,
There was one.
yes, and Charles is unaccounted for up until around like two
Right.
a.m. presumably, or
What's funny
maybe a
is
little
like
earlier. But
because like one of the things we established is that whoever did it kind of cleaned up after themselves
yes,
in the second scene,
yes,
which doesn't really speak goblin to me.
no, it doesn't,
Uh,
does it?
Again, the exception, as always, feels like it could be Toad Swallow. He's our crafty businessman
Business
goblin.
Goblin, yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Again, just with all of this sort of story, I just feel like I'm drowning in the abundance of information, and it's like this is all gonna fit like a puzzle piece when we know who did it. But for now, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't know what I can draw from this.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it more strongly rules out at least Guillermo and Marisica, and I do think it also helps to rule out Matthew at the very least, which is nice because he's definitely suspicious in terms of, hey, it's a car. Matthew has a car, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Because Edith was already sort of at the top of our list, and so I guess she's not ruled out. For me, I
No.
feel like we had that thing from Yolda at the end of Arc 3. It was about who, weren't there two people with her, and like the easy guess was sort of Edith and Charles,
Yes.
and they're the sort of two people who aren't made less suspicious
Yeah.
on this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like thinking about Charles as the ex-con being the person who did it, like if that's the metaphor we kind of use for him for part of
Hmm.
this, if he's the one who did the murder, I guess you'd sort of really have to frame it around the system being broken, sort of broke him to the point where he felt he had to act.
Mm.
But like, I'm just looking at people like Alexander and Bristow as our power people in this, and I can't help but notice that like what it seems to be is just the other people in power who are fucking attacking each other.
Mm. Yeah.
So I don't know who that leads me to as a suspect, but just thematically, I feel like the person I'm drifting towards suspecting the most would be someone else who was in a position of power, whether that's Miss or or the Alabaster or whoever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. And I guess the fact that we know it's more than one person means that this timeline stuff isn't necessarily conclusive. I mean, it maybe rules out Matthew, Guillerme, Marisica from the teenager's murder, but you know, they
Not from the whole plot.
exactly. Um, so next story goes into some out of hand in air quotes celebrations around Kennet.
Yeah, just like a fun insight into how this crazy night that we just experienced was interpreted by like the innocents in town.
Mm,
Um, I love how many extra little horror stories that we weren't privy to are sort of addressed here, like people trying to lure kids out of windows and shit. Like we didn't
Yeah.
see those others. Like it's just it's fun, like sort of extra decoration around those events.
Yep. Yeah. All kinds of stuff going on around town. Yeah.
Well,
So
and especially so, I just want to say as well. So it was the night that we just went through for this arc. Like that was the Monday night, and it was sort of like Monday night, Tuesday morning that we've just gone through with
yes,
like all of our characters. This is the Wednesday morning uh newsletter.
paper.
So this is
Right. So there's still been a day of time.
yes, like this is so because it was like Tuesday morning that the teenagers were reported missing. So this is like over 24 hours after all the events we just saw, basically.
Mm,
Which not only has interesting implications for where are the Kenneteers now, like are we about to go through a couple of days time skip? But one of the things that was established was all that shit with Daniel and the aware happened on the 29th slash the early hours of the 30th.
yeah.
This is now the first. It's Canada Day. There's a bunch of celebrations there. Like after all the shit that just went down, I feel like something big like Canada Day is just perfect for stirring shit up, right?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, what we really get from all these out of hand celebration stories is it's just the town is degrading over time. I mean, the breaking of the barrier is almost certainly going to just make it worse and worse. Again, I
Yeah.
come back to Verona thinking, oh, let's get back to magic school, and my thought is, I mean, that's just not going to happen. Like, that's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the next chapter was set on a Wednesday and or yeah, on this Canada Day Wednesday and the Kenneteers were still here.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, just like like in a world where like meaning and emotions power so much of the world, everyone having a big party for Canada Day just feels ripe for shit to come out of the woodworks magically.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
There's a pair of stories on the bottom of this page that seem designed to hurt Melissa. All the dance kids are doing really well. They're getting a bunch
Yep.
of awards, and
Yep.
then her, I'm pretty sure it's her brother, like
Yes.
a guy with the same surname, assuming brother, uh, has graduated and got some kick-ass scholarship.
Yep. Got some dosh.
Yeah, David Hunt on our Discord pointed out to me this could be read as like positive, like this could be some of Nicolette's bullshit to like give the
Yeah.
family support
Yeah.
because it's
Helping
like
to
they
bolster
say
the
this
family.
is the they say this is the last year we're ever going to do the scholarship, which is like did they empty the fund to give it like all to John?
Mm, maybe.
But
Hopefully.
just the fact that it's a sports scholarship to me is just like it's that salt in the wound, like
yeah.
her family being celebrated for being good athletes is just exactly not what Melissa needs right now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's really re-emphasizing, hey, everyone else is doing great except for you.
Yeah, like there's no way Melissa doesn't become a big deal very soon in the story. Like we've had a lot of build
Yeah.
up for her
Feels like
recently.
it's yeah, exactly. It's continuing to focus on the impacts that are applying to Melissa.
And when, especially as we've just saved Verona and Clem and Dan through like people supporting each other, how do we do that with someone like Melissa? Like I feel like that's an
Mm,
interesting follow up to the conclusions we've just sort of had this week. We're sort of saying, yeah, you can help people by raising them up, and then you sort of take someone like Melissa who is pushing everyone away and doesn't want to be helped up, and it's like,
mm,
okay, well, what do you do? It's like Nicolette said, at a certain point, you can't keep trying to help her,
yeah.
and that obviously applies to a certain uh, father, one of the Kenneteers, which is of course why Melissa showed up in that nightmare. I think.
Yeah, okay.
I'd say comparing Melissa and Verona's dad, I think
No,
there's some
fair.
connections there, and I think that's probably
That's
where we'll
where
go
that
with it.
came from for Verona.
Yeah, and I think that
Okay.
that's probably what we'll be touching on when we start to deal with Melissa is how do you help someone who seems unhelpable like Verona's dad.
Mm, yeah, fair enough. So yeah, we then continue through the paper with the conclusion of the missing teens story and a bit of an opinion piece about how nurses are having to deal with more and more problematic patients.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also a piece about how the town is kind of dying. Um, because people leave and it's harder to get people to come out here.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I don't know, that jumped out to me, maybe because I'm someone who lives in a small town that is, I think small towns all over the world are going through that. Um,
Mm.
like it just sort of, I always notice the health of Kennet as a town is sort of a constant undercurrent of this story. And that feels like, it's mapping to what is happening here. Like Miss and stuff are leaving. Like we're about to try and recruit the other side of the town. I feel like the magical side of the town will always reflect the mundane side.
Mm.
So, I'm very interested to sort of track the concept of this town dying and how it relates to what's happening to it magically.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I mean, the whole newspaper kind of has this theme of the town is getting into a really promising, sorry, not promising, problematic space, right? As it degrades. And it's interesting that we get in this opinion piece, that exact thing happening in the sense that the anonymous author writes about how it feels like the town is going out with a whimper. Um, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's the flip side of the innocence perspective, right? It's the innocence perspective
Yeah.
on this degradation rather than on any specific uh, event.
Yeah. I guess it's just a theme that jumps out to me because it's something I see in my real life. And so
Mm.
then the next step for me is thinking, okay, well, it happening to Kennet in the mundane sense means it probably maps to something that's happening to Kennet. It's happening to Kennet in the magical sense. And so I'm just trying to draw lines there.
Mm.
Because there's even the bit there, the out of hand celebration stuff opened with all the things about how the Kennet police are now like Ontario police. It's not like a local police force in the same way,
Mm.
and talking about the potential problems around that sort of stuff. Um, and that reminded me of things like the Kenneteers. They were sort of brought in as the new police force in a way
Mm.
for the others in town. Um, they're not others though. They had to bring in outsiders. They had to bring in humans, and that hasn't sat well with everyone from the looks of it. Like we know Edith and Matthew have had their own issues with that as a concept.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I guess where do we? Yeah, again, just parallels. I'm going to keep my eye on and see where they go.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah. So something that I guess another clue. I kind of kept my eyes out for clues in this in this
Yeah,
newspapers.
absolutely.
Um, Another clue is that the car is identified as a Chevron Floridian, which I looked to see if that was mentioned before and didn't have anything. It doesn't seem to match Matthew's car. And actually, I mean, I'm not a car person, but I think this is not a real car. I tried finding if this
Yeah,
is an actual car. If you type Chevron car into Google Images, I just get a bunch of like animated cars that look like they're from Cars or something else. I don't know. So I don't think this is a real type of car. In fact, apparently Chevron cars are just part of an advertising campaign of Chevron. Does Chevron even make proper cars? Like,
there is a Chevron Cars Limited, but they make racing cars.
right? And Chevron is obviously a like an oil corporation, right?
Yeah.
So I guess this is alternate reality. They don't make cars. So yeah, I can't kind of look up what this car looks like and see if it matches anything else. But it doesn't seem to have been mentioned in our story before. So um, no concrete clues there.
Yeah, I'm very much not a car person, so even some of the stuff where people are mentioning cars or sedans to me, I'm just like, "Oh,
Mm.
I don't remember if the other one was." Um,
Yeah.
so if there is a clue here, it's hidden too well for me to have actually gotten anything out of it so far.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So yeah, then finally we get to the final part of the newspaper, which is the quirky section, which has a story about a strange dolphin and some fun puzzles.
So this is Clem's dolphin. I'm like 99% sure. Um,
Yes,
from her
100% it is.
from her dossiers page, which is just fucking hilarious that this dolphin has spent 11 years fucking teleporting around the world trying to be Clem's friend so that she can ride it.
Yeah. Yeah, which great. Great. I'm glad we finally got. I mean, I know we complained about the dolphin thing when that came up in the dossier and we didn't get the resolution. So yeah, I'm glad we finally get the resolution of that now.
I just wonder what the monkey paws part of the dolphin is,
I mean,
because
it's a crazy dolphin that's following her around, desperate to be ridden. I don't know.
yeah, well, do you think it like like lets her ride it into like the middle of the like does it take her like would it take her right to the middle of the Great Lake and just sort of, you know, strand her there or something?
Yeah, maybe, maybe hard to know. Now, of course, this newspaper is full of clues, and the most important part is the Sudoku, this thermos Sudoku that we have, or it's called a strange Sudoku in this newspaper. Uh, I solved it, and so I know what clue it's
Oh,
giving to us about the murder. Now, if you,
hit us with it.
well, if I guess we should put a spoiler. If you don't want to know these clues, just skip ahead 10 or 15 seconds. But if you do, the Sudoku says there's one part of it where it says 789. So clearly there's a character called Seven
Ooh.
who has eaten a character called Nine in this story. So we'll have to keep our eyes out for that.
Well, 9
Hmm.
rhymes with carmine.
Oh, yeah. And Seven rhymes with Kevin. Do we have a Kevin
Yeah,
character?
Kevin no one, the evil eye guy.
Aha! And thus it's solved. Kevin ate the Carmine Beast.
We did it. Um yeah, God, I'm just trying to think of any other names that rhyme with 7. There's no
Uh,
Evans in this story, right?
no, no. Steven, which is a wrong way to pronounce Stephen.
No, it must be Kevin.
Hmm.
Cool,
I
lock it
think
in.
so. Lock it
Alright.
in. We know
Um,
it. Put it in the power
no,
predictor.
but yeah, aside from this, there are just a bunch of cool Easter eggs in this whole newsletter, but, like, this end bit is clearly just, like, Wildbow having fun with them. So,
Yeah.
like, all the unscrambled things someone pointed out to me, they don't just have the answers that are given in the newsletter, but they also are all anagrams for villains in
Yes.
previous Wildbow works.
Yes. It's great. I mean, there's great stuff in there.
Um, the cipher translates into a quote that I think the White Duke was the first person to solve on Reddit. I don't know what to make of the quote. It seems very loaded with like path and miss related imagery.
Mm.
Make what you will of that. The cipher itself, Wobbo actually mentioned, is it's rotating the letters by 7919, like 7,919.
Yep. Great.
Which is of course our old favorite number from Mister Numberman.
Yep.
Trying to think. Somebody else pointed out to me there's some fun Easter eggs in the advertisements for previous
Yes.
Walbo works.
Yes.
Um, so just like I think Walbo was clearly just having fun with this. I think
Yeah.
that's
What a
what really
fun little
sells this.
bonus bit.
Yeah, this whole extra material is just really sold by the fun Walbo's having with getting to experiment with these new formats.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the end of the chapters for this week. Some great stuff in there. Definitely solve that Sudoku. It's a fun one. Took me a while, but a bunch of the community members have done it, so feel free to reach out if you want help with it. Let's move on to some Pale predictions, which are predictions that our community members have posted in our Pale Predictor spreadsheet, making cold shots.
Yeah, so I've pulled out a prediction by Meiji How?
Mm-hmm.
Meiji How? Who, if you will remember, was the person who predicted the pro strat of getting Charles to tell Clem.
Yep. Yes.
So they're on a bit of a roll.
Yep.
And they've put in a question for our new category, which is who at the Blue Heron Institute is helping Bristow. So remember,
Yes.
we know someone is working against Alexander. Oh, I think we strongly suspect. I don't think we actually know that. But Meishi Hao actually has said that the person who's betraying Alex might actually be Nicolette. She
Mm.
just doesn't know it.
Mm.
Um, but she is secretly working with this other coven, like, we
Yes.
had that set up in her interlude,
Yes.
and, Meiji House suspects that maybe that coven is in cahoots with Bristow, or, I mean, maybe it's even Bristow in disguise. Um, but yeah, just the idea that Nicolette is actually inadvertently selling out, Alexander to Bristow.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
It does. I think it's even better if it is just one of because he has so many assholes around him. I would feel very vindicated that he's being betrayed for surrounding himself with dipshits.
Yes.
So I do kind of want it to just the answer be like Chase, Seth, or Y. Yeah, like just so for a bit of just desserts, but this would certainly be a very like surprising twist.
Mm, yeah. Um, I put out a prediction by user David L. Hunt, and I think it's important that sometimes we pull out predictions that are wrong as well. I mean, a lot of people make great predictions, but sometimes people make predictions that are just definitely going to be wrong. And so that's what I put out for David L. Hunt here. Put him on blast. Their prediction is that there are going to be no reveals of secret practitioners posing as normal people. Absolutely none. Especially not Grumble, Jasmine, Verona's dad, Mr. Lie, or anyone else. Which I think is almost certainly correct. Possibly the only way this is going to be correct is because they didn't mention Aunt Heather, who I think is the most promising candidate for a secret practitioner. So we'll see.
I like, yeah, David, it's just not worth it. Like, he just won't listen. I don't know what to tell you.
Nice try, buddy.
This is just not a fight worth having.
If you want to leave your predictions on what's going to happen in this mystery, you can do that by going to our Power Predictor spreadsheet form thingy, which you can find in the description down below.
Yes. We're also on Twitter at MediaMD Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hip and happening place to go to see the live reads, which are on a new schedule that almost went flawlessly for its first week. I think it's definitely working better for me than the old one.
Yep,
So
good.
come check them out.
Yeah, cool. You can also leave your comments on this show, on the discussion threads, on anything in our Reddit thread, which again will be linked down in the show notes down below. Discuss the show. Hey, solve a Sudoku. Why not? Do all kinds of cool things in the discussion threads.
Yes. Also, head on over to doofmedia.com to find out all about like the other shows on Doof, because there's a bunch of them. They're pretty good.
Yeah, all kinds of great shows. Something that we don't talk about that much, but we probably should start talking about it more, is all the great bonus content that we do as well for our patrons. If you are a patron at the $10 a month or more level, is that right, Elliot?
That is correct.
That is
The
correct, yes.
Doof Troop.
Yes, the Doof Troop level. You get access to a whole bunch of bonus content each and every month, and I think we do at least one every week now. Not officially, but more or less that's how it plays out.
We in theory have at least the first 4 Wednesdays of every month there will be content.
Which is more or less every week. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
all kinds of great bonus content. In fact, we did one just recently ourselves.
Yes, we are technically the third Wednesday of every month now. The High Ground. So that features Ruben, myself, and my sister Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
As we give the Doof treatment to a series that really needed it, the Star Wars prequel movies.
Yes. It's great. A lot of fun talking about these incredibly well put together, crafted movies.
Yeah, just solid 10 out of 10 films. Yeah,
Yes.
so the first episode of that is out now. Second one will be coming soon, but go check it out.
Yep. To get access, go to patreon.com/doofmedia and ensure that you donate at the $10 a month or more level. While you're on Patreon, why not head over to Warbo's Patreon as well? Huh? He's got a Patreon, and that's how you can support him and make sure that he has the funds that he needs to keep producing newspaper and Sudokus like this.
Yeah, well, print media is dying.
Yeah.
And
Warbo's trying to break into it, so he needs your help.
Yeah. Warbo needs these funds to
Yeah.
support his new newspaper. So head on over to his Patreon to help keep the Kennet Kaller alive.
Yeah. But that's it for us for this week. We'll see you next week for maybe more Back Away. It might be a new arc. I feel like it's about time for a new arc. So we'll see. We'll see next week. See you then.
See ya.